Well, good afternoon. Good afternoon and welcome to another of our Wednesday webinar series. This is our third episode of managing your business through, your sixth episode of managing your business through the pandemic crisis. I'm Kelly Bearden. I'm the director of the California State Bakersfield SBDC. And I'm actually live from home today, looking as I look out the window. The good thing is there probably won't be a fire truck that goes rolling down the road, but I am at the mercy of my neighbor's gardeners, the dogs, and other things that happen from being pretty much in place, isolated at home. So we're going to continue every Wednesday looking at resources available for small businesses that are so severely impacted by the pandemic, looking for the most important topics of the day. And we had a lot of stuff, there were a lot of good stuff happen overnight in the last 24 hours. So good timing for our webinar this Wednesday. And we'll always look for more topics to add down the road as we try to get businesses restarted and try to do our part in assisting you get back up and going. So a lot of information to go over today. There's some things that we're going to talk about, and there's some things we're not going to talk about. To let you know up front what we're not going to talk about. We're not going to talk about the big companies that got a lot of money through the program that is designed for small businesses of 500 employees and less. Many of those are public companies. We're not going to talk about Shake Shack and the fact that they're giving money back, and some of the other larger people took it, and larger companies. So we're going to let that go. We're not going to talk about some of our other frustrations that I've been hearing a lot lately, and that's some things like the bonus unemployment paid to employees as they try to get hired back. We'll leave that off the table for now. The big one we're going to leave off the table today, though, is the fact that we still don't have final rules for loan forgiveness for the PPP program. And when we are expecting those by the 26th of April, and those are going to be coming. So we're excited that that is on its way. So next week, maybe every one of those topics will be covered, but we got a lot of new stuff to go over. We have a lot of individuals that have applied. We found out last week that there are many that have applied and are in that kind of limbo status, and I'm sure that pertains to many of you attending today's webinar. So first of all, a little recognition and love for our sponsors, starting with, of course, at the top, the U.S. Small Business Administration, that is a major funder of the SBDC program nationally, the Governor's Office for Business and Economic Development. Locally here, Kern County is an absolute great economic development partner of the SBDC, supported locally also by our CSUB School of Business and Public Administration, and also Mid-State Development Corporation. We're also part of the Blue Tech Valley program, and a new sponsor today, the Kern Economic Development Foundation. So as I mentioned, we are part of the 1,000 plus centers across the country, funded nationally by the U.S. Small Business Administration, called the Small Business Development Center program. And in California, we're part of the Central California region. So 14 counties in the central swath of the state of California, from the Pacific Ocean to the state of Nevada, the far northern boundary up in Mono County, up where it actually runs into Nevada, and then south to Kern County. So that's our territory there. I call it the Little Italy, kind of shaped like Italy, a little almost boot-like Mono, Inyo, and Kern County aspects. And we also have 4 other centers, or excuse me, 5, throughout the rest of the region, located in Fresno, Merced, Modesto, Salinas, and down at San Luis Obispo. So that's a little bit about the SBDC program. So let's talk about what's new today. And as many of you are aware of, there's going to be more stimulus on the way. We'll go over a little bit of what's going on with the new stimulus bill as it made its way through the Senate and still has to get through the House and also be signed by the president, but it looks favorable that that's going to happen. We're going to look at a little bit about EIDL and about where the funds went. EIDL and PPP. There's a lot of information that's been released overnight by the SBA and has been picked up, and we're going to kind of cover that. The nice thing is it gives us a lot of detail and it gives us a lot of numbers to where we can kind of figure out potentially where many of you stand right now. And then we'll get into kind of some updates on those particular programs as well with the EIDL and the PPP. You know, one thing that I've really wanted to cover more is the sole props and independent contractors that came online on April the 10th. And what is new is in the new stimulus, there's some hope that we might be able to get a lot of the independent contractors and self-employed individuals actually. So you're self-employed and independent contractors, some relief and get them some help. It's been such a process to get to this point that many of them have been kind of left out, especially with the late filing date of April the 10th for PPP. Mention the final interim rules on PPP, and I can tell you I have heard so many, and that's on the loan forgiveness part of it. I can tell you that there are so many questions that I have got in the last week or maybe even a little longer since some of the actual notes have been released and some of the people are starting to get funded for PPP. And many of those are very detailed, intricate questions. There are resources out there that we might talk about that if you're interested. I want to give you the final interim rules when we know exactly what the rules and how the game's going to be played. And as I mentioned in the intro, we'll talk about that in much more detail later. And there's also much more to talk about today. But right now it's poll time, and see, this is what happens when you get old. You put a slide in there just to remind yourself to launch a poll. And so in the past few weeks, we've had some great poll responses and questions that come out and really help us gauge what is going on with our audience. And so what we've learned before I launch this first poll, I'll set it up a little bit, is that as of last week, we had nearly 3/4 of those in attendance, a few hundred of you actually, that have actually already applied for PPP. So you have applied or you intended to apply was nearly 75%. So going off of that, our poll question today, our first poll question is going to be, if you applied for PPP, what is your current status? It's yes, I signed the note and got the funds. Yes, I'm notified, I'm approved, funds are in process. No, I haven't heard from my lender, and no, my deal is still in process. So we'll give you a few moments to jump in and vote. We were up to about 30% now. It's kind of split across the board pretty evenly. Unfortunately, the biggest chunk is that last one, the no. I think if you signed your note and got funded, a few of you might have dropped off this week thinking, yeah. So anyway, we'll give you another second or two, one more minute or two. We're approaching the 50%, the threshold that I really like to see. And 48% of you have voted at this time. I'm going to end the poll right now and share the results with you. And the results are 37% of you have heard your deal is still in process, but no, you haven't received it. Or then also 31% have not heard from your lender. 22% of you have signed the note, and yes, you've received funding, so congratulations on that. And another 11% of you have actually been notified that your funds are in process. So that's great. One thing about that is it's, I think, really consistent with the numbers that we are seeing from hearing from lenders. And when our special guest is out later, we can talk about that in more detail. 1/3 of you that have applied have actually received funding or notification. And that seems to be a very consistent number, both locally and more regionally and across the country. So thank you for voting. We will now go to poll question number 2, which is going to be regarding EIDL. And it's going to ask the same thing, that if you applied for an EIDL, what is your current status? Current status of EIDL. One is, yes, I've heard and received an advance grant. So there's 2 components of this question. One is an advance grant, which is the forgivable grant, and the other is the EIDL loan. And the no's are no, I have not heard, and I applied before 3:30, and no, I have not heard, and I applied after 3:30. So vote it up. We have numbers on both of these programs that we're going to be going over, kind of show you the big picture, the scope of things of where everyone is. And we'll take it from there. We're going to end the poll in just a couple of seconds. We have about 33% of you voted. And let's end the poll and share those results with you. And a whopping 52% of you have not heard, and you applied after 3:30 with the easier portal. 29% have not heard about their current status and applied before 3:30. And about 20% of you have either heard you will receive the grant or the EIDL loan. So we'll get into some of those numbers, and we'll do some analysis on what's happening and what's going on there. And, you know, last week I asked a third question, and I'm going to do that again this week. And this is going to potentially have a particular prize to it. So we'll talk about that in a little bit, but it's going to be for the first person that gets this question correct. And last week it was on a Merle Haggard covered song. And I'm going to read you the question, and then I will launch the poll. Remember, the first one to get the correct answer is going to win. So Merle Haggard recorded a tune called Honky Tonk Nighttime Man, which was covered by this artist shortly before their tragic plane crash. Was it Stevie Ray Vaughan, Leonard Skinner, John Denver, Patsy Cline, and Jim Croce? All of them, unfortunately, met their ends or some of them in the plane crash. And right now, as the poll's going on, I can tell you that the leader is Mr. John Denver, followed fairly closely by Leonard Skinner. Patsy Cline's third. I'm going to end the poll. Your last chance to get in, and we're done. And 40% of you thought that John Denver covered the Honky Tonk Nighttime Man. And that would be a very logical answer, but it's incorrect. Jim Croce, 11%, also incorrect, as is Patsy Cline at 13%. Wouldn't it have been funny, though, having Patsy Cline cover I'm a Honky Tonk Nighttime Man? That'd been great. Stevie Ray Vaughan, I thought, was an excellent choice, but it is Leonard Skinner. And Leonard Skinner, in their final album that was released about the time they crashed in a swamp in 1977, recorded Honky Tonk Nighttime Man. And actually, one of their last appearances in the state of California, about 6 weeks before, they played a live version of that referenced a little bit of Bakersfield before going into the song. So little unknown fact to many of you out there, but 27% of you got it correct. That's really good. I saw one answer come in really quick. The poll will timestamp your answer, and you will win a prize to be mentioned really soon. So thank you for playing along with the polls. We'll probably have another whimsical question. It will probably not be on the Merle Haggard covered tune next week. I think I'm out of those. So moving right along. You know, I'd like to welcome a new sponsor that we have, and that is the Current Economic Development Foundation. And through the generosity of Chevron, who has provided a number of gift cards for first responders and others that are in the community that are suffering through this pandemic, the Current Economic Foundation is making available some of those gift cards to attendees of our webinar today. And the first 9 people that go into the chat box right now and say, thanks, Chevron, are going to win a $100 gift card from Chevron. So jump in there, chat away. Thanks, Chevron. The first 9 individuals will win a card. You'll be contacted by the Current Economic Development Foundation. They'll ask for your address and mail those cards out. If you haven't got in already, you're probably a little late. So I'd probably stop as I watch the number go up and up and up. But thank you to Chevron for the kind and generous award, knowing you have to be a small business to win that award too. So if you were the first person, but they did make them for small business owners. So if you're part of my staff, which isn't eligible to win, or someone else that's not considered a small business, they're doing it for first responders and impacted members of the community, which include our small business community. So thank you so much. Okay, just kind of looking back, because I'm a believer in you look back to see where you go forward. And these are a couple of slides that that were referenced from Bank of America last year. And it talked a little bit about economic downturn, first of all. And remember, this was in 2019 when we were going through a just marvelous economy. Economic downturn was one of the fewer things that I think we were talking about. I did bring this slide up at our Eastern Kern Capital Summit in September in Tehachapi, and then again in our Eastern Sierra Capital Summit in Mono County. But it's interesting to see how people were prepared for an economic downturn. And I understand this is like an economic catastrophe, not an economic downturn. But almost 70% had claimed that they had taken steps to protect their business, and 30% had not. And hopefully those that established and had an emergency fund or created a plan with reduced expenses, opened a credit line, are actually benefiting from that now. And the other thing, the other slide that we used at the time, thinking that who knows, maybe sometime down the road this might happen. And this is interesting because this is a disaster preparedness slide, but it is, I have a continuity plan in place for my business, 61%. And of course, the continuity and the disasters we were thinking about were the traditional types of flood, fire, earthquake, tornado, hurricane, etc. So in order to protect against many of those perils, individuals had purchased insurance policies, they backed up their files, kind of a little bit different type of disaster now. But the big thing that is in this that I really like to see is the business continuity and having a business continuity plan, which I hope each of you will work on a little miniature version of a business plan in order to restart or to bring your business up to greater scale. So just kind of a recap of our recent discussions, and we've been focusing a lot on emergency funding and EIDL and PPP, the lenders that are out there for you, and there'll be a lot of discussion on lenders again today with the new monies coming that we'll discuss. Well, deferring debt and expenses is crucial. Really, you're going to hear me talk about cash flow for a long time. So if you're sick of it, I'm sorry in advance. We will be talking about cash flow a lot. But it's really important also that you adapt, because it is a changing environment and business is different now. And look for unique and creative ideas and solutions that involve individuals that are maybe employees and others to, brainstorm ideas and look online what other people are doing and look for those opportunities also. So consider those, consider these, and let's move on. The good thing is I've had an acronym definition complete slide, and this is going to be the last call because I think we all know what EIDL and PPP are. So no more definitions of acronyms in these webinars. I feel like we've graduated and we're moving on. So I'm going to right now introduce our guest speaker for today. And our guest speaker today is Keith Brice. And Keith is the president and CEO of Midstate Development. Keith earned his bachelor's from Dayton University in Dayton. He's gone to a banking school, which I never really knew existed until I saw your bio, Keith, but it makes total good sense. And if you're going to go to a banking school, go to the Pacific Coast Banking School in Seattle, somewhere good. And Keith has been at the president and CEO at Midstate, which is, Kern County's largest by dollar volume SBA lender. Keith works with literally I would say dozens, but it's probably closer to 100 lenders throughout the San Joaquin Valley in working on getting small businesses loans for fixed assets and other issues. Almost $500 million in loans over those times, 12,000. Keith, thank you for joining us and welcome today.
Thank you, Kelly. It's always good to be on with your group here, and it's exciting to hear consistently of folks actually getting some money, and we're gonna cover some examples real quick. I see where you covered earlier the bill was passed in the Senate, and I think it's going to the House. I think tomorrow morning. Tomorrow morning is what we're expecting it to do. I think I would be remiss if I didn't cover some things that I talked about last time, and it just tells you how the SBA programs have changed. When we talked a couple weeks ago, the PPP program went from funding in 5 days. In other words, once you got an approval by the bank and a designated authorization, you had to receive funds in 5 days. Now that's stretched out to 10 days. The EIDL grant, which I personally think is one of the better options out there, went from an automatic 10,000 to 1,000 per employee back to, I think it's 10,000 now. And then they also EIDL changed a little bit from how they did the calculation on gross profit to working capital to back to gross profit. Probably want to cover, Kelly, today some of the reality of the PPP program and what's going on. Don't like to start out with the negative, but for those, and I looked at the poll, and the poll was pretty promising, but for those that have not applied for your PPP loan yet, there's a very real possibility that you may again miss this funding cycle. And here's the reason why. There were several that, and it was reflected in the poll, that did apply at the prior funding cycle and were shut out. So what's happened? Well, during this interim period, if you are a small business owner and you had applied at your lender and you were in fact shut out, high probability that your lender is working on your application to the point to when it goes live, and it will go live fairly quickly. So if you think about the time frame, if the House passes the bill tomorrow morning and the president signs it shortly after, the program may go live Friday morning. And there's a real possibility midway to the latter part of next week, the funding may be allocated. I think earlier Kelly had shared some numbers of the percentages of businesses that are eligible or deemed it could be eligible. So there are a lot of folks out there that are waiting for the PPP. So now, if you've not applied for the PPP, what you need to do immediately, one is, first place to check is with your lender. That's either via call, or if they're still open. Actually, when I say open, then you physically can go in there and find out what their process is. You know, are they accepting applications? What are their criteria for their application? I think we beat up the lenders in the past about limiting, you know, who they're going to accept for PPP applications, but it's important that you know, and you know fairly quickly. If you go past the weekend without having applied for a PPP, then I think you're missing the boat. So I would set a personal goal, if I was a small business owner, that I would have an application completed and submitted, hopefully, to my lender no later than Friday of this week. Now, what's going on with the lenders out there? Contrary to the rumor of banking hours, I have talked to probably every lender in Bakersfield and some in Kern County that were actually working both Saturday and Sunday. And part of it was were trying to prepare their pending I'm running in the PPs here, applications that were not submitted in time. So you can feel confident that if you had a pending application, there's a high probability that your lender was working on it and is prepared to submit it. If you've not, Kelly, are we going to show a little bit later some of the non-traditional banks out there?
I don't believe so, not today.
Okay.
I think we're going to just discuss them.
Okay, we'll just, there are the beauty of what's with the internet and access, all you really have to do is type in PPP lender, and you will have multiple lenders pop up. And they're very credible. Everybody's a little leery of applying or providing financial information online, and you have to do your due diligence. But there are some wonderful online lenders that are funding these PPP loans fairly aggressively and consistently. A great story. I had been talking to a customer a couple of weeks ago, and his lender had shut him out, and it was a reasonable reason why he was shut out. I gave him 3 sources. He called back earlier this week to indicate that he got his money. I think he used Ready Capital, one of them, and he was tickled pink. So a lot of it has to be how progressive and how aggressive you're going to be.
Pete, I'm really interested in your interpretation when we get into some of this money here and some of this new money, especially when we start talking about the 60 billion that's going to small lenders. So let's just dive into these top 3 that are the important 3 with the new stimulus. And so what was passed, for those of you that don't know, is EIDL, 60 billion for EIDL. And that's nice. 50 of it is going toward loans and 10 toward grants. Keith talked about the great need for PPP to get in because they have allocated another 250 billion. And as Keith mentioned, there's a huge pipeline. There's a huge pipeline of deals that are going to get sucked into that 250. But what I wanted to get to was the other part of it was that a part of it that I really like is the 60 billion that is going to exclusively to smaller lenders that have assets of, I believe, less than half of it for lenders less than 50 billion, and the other half lenders under $10 billion in assets. That brings us down to a lot of small players that can, I think, really help some of our smaller businesses, our self-employed, and others that get into that.
Yeah, what those numbers tell you is I think the both Congress and the SBA has sort of learned their lesson. They were trying to build a plane while flying. That there is a bigger need for these monies to get into community lenders, to get them into the smaller customers out there. So if you look at 60 billion for EIDL, personally, I think the EIDL is one of the better loan programs. The PPP, everybody, it's the one that's fairly prominent. But the EIDL, if you peel back the onion, that's a 30-year fixed rate, 3.75% loan up to $2 million without interest without payments for the first year. That is a game changer for a lot of small businesses that could get some money via the EIDL. The EIDL, I know that's an SBA application directly online. I think we've covered that before. They have not gone live on accepting those applications, but I would definitely encourage our folks out there that if they've not applied for an EIDL loan to look at that. And we'll talk a little bit more about some success stories with the EIDL piece of it. The other piece with the PPP, we talked about the 250 billion. I think that's going to go fairly quickly. I got to be honest with you. I think those numbers are going to go beginning of the week. The smaller market lenders, we've covered a little bit of that, and I think those dollars are really going to be beneficial to some of the folks in here in the Valley, because we're considered somewhat of an underserved market. Don't know too much about the details of the healthcare and the hospital monies, and obviously testing for viruses are pretty self-explanatory. Loan fees for the lenders, as you can or you may not know, that what the SBA and what Congress is trying to do is they're not trying to fee the small business owners on any of these loans. However, there are fees that are going to be required to be paid and paid to the lenders. And this is a way of, again, further encouraging lenders to participate in the program, and also makes it a little bit more profitable.
Keith, my two favorite statistics that came out of this that support everything you just said is that in the last 14 days, or in 14 days that the EIDL was up and going, there were more SBA loans done those 14 days than the previous 14 years. And also at the start of this, there were about, I believe about 1,700 SBA lenders around the country. And now we have nearly 5,000 that are participating in this programs.
For us at Mid-State Development, that's wonderful news. I've had people that couldn't spell SBA calling me now because we're an SBA lender. And we had some exciting news on our particular program. We were also, we had been granted some funds, not at Mid-State, for our small business customers, that if you had an existing 7A and or SBA 504 loan that we do here, your payments on the SBA portion was going to be made for 6 months beginning April 1st. So we had several phone calls from customers that in these times have been watching their bank accounts and looking for ACHs, and well, why didn't your payment come out? Fortunately, we were able to pay those payments for the next 6 months, and it's not a deferral. It's actually being paid on 7A and 504 loans. The added bonus that just happened was that on all new 504 and 7A loans that are either approved and funded before September 20th, will have 6 months of their payments made. And it's not a deferral. So that's a positive. We have several projects that people are confident that their gross numbers are going to come back, and they're moving forward with pursuing some loans. One of the things that Kelly, I think you had the $10,000 grant up there on the EIDL slide.
Mm-hmm.
I had a customer give me a great analogy on the and they were fortunate to get the $10,000 grant, in that that was just great news for them, because to get 10,000 net, without any direct cost, he tried to back into the number of sales he would have to do, and it resulted in almost a quarter of sales to get a profit of $10,000, of which he got deposited into his account fairly quickly.
So Keith, here's some of the numbers that we've learned from EIDL now that it's been up and going. We've been speculating that there was 10 billion in grants and about 8 billion, at least that was the best information I could come up with. And here's what we've seen that has been processed till they closed it down. So remember, 2/3 of you are still or 80% of you, I think, in EIDL are still looking for the money. And we're seeing that as far as the advances, the grant advances, they're averaging about $4,600. And there have been nearly $750,000 that have been processed for the tune of $3.2 million. So SBA, and here it is by state, the breakdown by state. And, I guess we're concerned about California, but the breakdown by state. But the interesting thing is, with these $1,000 per employee advance grants, and they've put out 3.2 million. Totally, they've received over 4 million applications for both the advances and the loans. So I think what that's telling us, and there's $10 billion that's still going to be added to the program now, that there's a lot of funding that's going to be available to meet the EIDL request for those of you that are waiting for an EIDL grant up to $10,000. So
I will tell you, I reached out to a mid-state customer yesterday who had gotten his EIDL application in a timely manner. And he had just received an email with a loan number and a contact. So they are still decisioning a lot of the EIDL applications right now. And that's one of the reasons why they're not accepting any other applications at this point. They are trying to get through the backlog of applications out there. Again, I'm kind of biased on the EIDL program. I think it's a wonderful program that if you qualify and you can get an application in, that's directly with the SBA. That's one that you definitely need to pursue.
okay, great. So here's EIDL loans.
Kelly, can I talk about a EIDL example right now? Is this the appropriate time?
I think it's a great time, and then we'll go over to the national numbers on EIDL loans.
Sure. Okay, I'll give you an example of, and this is somewhat time sensitive about what's happened with the EIDL program. I had and I consider this a success story. I had an early small business customer reach out soon as they started talking about disaster funding, wanting to get in line and submit an application. This is even prior to the PPP being released, when EIDL was the first disaster loan that was being actively discussed there. They applied on March 18th. Now, we've talked about this in the past. The EIDL platform the SBA had, they were using an older platform, primarily used for different types of disasters, nothing of this magnitude. So that platform changed a couple times. This same customer then reapplied on March 30th, using it, and it's a very easy application compared to the first one, the old version. April 7th, received a confirmation and reached out directly to the SBA via phone. I think we've provided phone numbers and the website to check on if you had an EIDL loan going on. Well, they reached out and via phone and via email, they were told that they were going to get substantially less than what they had anticipated on the EIDL. When I say substantially less, they were going to get about $25,000, and everything's relative. You know, that could be a lot to some small businesses. It can be not a lot to others. But in any event, they were going to get something substantially less, and that was going to be based on a working capital formula, where in the past the EIDL was going to be based on a gross income type of, gross profit type of formula. There's still some changes as to what they're going to be looking at, but let's fast forward and we're going to go up to last week. This same customer called me, and there's a few of them that I've been trying to consistently monitor what's going on, so I can pass that information along. They received notice that they are in fact going to get a six-figure EIDL loan. The documents are en route, and their $10,000 grant was deposited last Monday. So again, we're looking at starting in mid-March and getting some funding for at least the grant at the beginning of this week, and the other funds coming fairly shortly. So they were consistent and they were persistent. That's the other thing I will leave with you there.
Persistence counts. So one thing that's kind of interesting about the numbers that were finally shared on the EIDL program was that the big program that Keith talked about, the loans, about $5.5 billion total and nearly 27,000 loans. And the interesting thing about this is last week we talked about the PPP numbers, and we might get into that today, but I don't think we're going to have time because I really want your questions. So hit the question box, everyone. Hit the question box. While we have Keith here, we're going to have some time to go through some questions. And also, the numbers didn't really change much from last time. But here's the key, is that the average for an EIDL loan, not the advanced grant, the EIDL loan was about $206,000. The average size loan for the PPP fell down to $206,000. So the EIDL loan and the PPP are both literally at $206,000 average size of loans. So it kind of gives us an idea to now where we can start working some numbers, knowing that EIDL is going to have 50 billion. So if the previous, we had 5.5 billion, we have about 10 times that many loans. So maybe nationwide, we have maybe 250,000, 250,000 if it stays at the 206,000 average here. And it seems like we have enough to get most of ours. If you've applied, it sounds like there's money in the queue for you to be funded through this next supplemental stimulus policy. So there it is by state. And if anybody wants this information, you can email me, and it's in a PDF or it's online at the SBA site. They just posted it early this morning. So that is the latest on that particular fund. So let's move on and let's look for some actual other information to talk about at this time, and then we'll move on. But be hitting that question box because we have plenty of questions that we're hoping to get in there today. So that was a little bit about what we had learned about EIDL, and the maximum was 10 grand, and 330 seems to be the cutoff. If you got in with the loan before 330, I think you're in a far more advantageous position than after 330.
I would agree.
All the 330 that are getting the loans, the pre-330 people were submitting very detailed applications. There still might be a process to where we go through and their applicants are asked for that information, but that 330 might be a really telling date as far as the application status that you applied. So there's kind of that information that we had just talked about. Over 4 million, they funded 750,000 so far, with an average loan size right here, means that with an additional $10 billion in there, there should be enough to hopefully do everybody who's already applied, and then some.
And one thing, Kelly, what I think that's also going to happen is when the bill is signed, again, hopefully tomorrow, I'm not sure if the SBA EIDL portal is going to open up right away. And the only reason why I'm saying that, and I may be wrong, is that there is a backlog of EIDL applications out there. So my sense is that their goal is to get through as many of the backlog as possible before they open up the portal. I may be wrong. The one thing I've consistently told people, you need to check the SBA website every day. If you're a small business owner, when you get up and you may be checking whatever you get your news from, it would not hurt to log on to the SBA disaster website every day to see what's going on, what's new.
Good point. So there we go, 206,000 for the 27,000 businesses. There's our wonderful PPP slide. I like to call it the 3P. The approvals did change. We went over these numbers last week based on the numbers through 4/13. And they stayed a little bit, the main aspect of it was with the big people getting in, we were around 240,000 for an average loan size. And that loan size, by the time the funds were expended a few days later, was down to 206,000. So numerically, that's telling me that that number is going to continue to drop, I think, substantially as our smaller applications get in and they get in with the smaller community banks, credit unions, and other people in rural communities, minorities, and women are given better access to the program as part of that 60 billion. So there you go. And just my example, just so you kind of have a place in time. You know, I've seen a lot of food retail type businesses that are doing about $1.5 million and have 20 to 30 employees, and they pay a little bit more than minimum wage plus some tips. And their average PPP, their average 2-month payroll for that period has them requesting about $100,000. So with a $206,000 average loan size, you can see we're really talking about employers on average that were, 40, 50 and way up that were getting the money initially. That's about to change. And that's the good news for today. So we've hit this, and moving forward, it's still really one of the big issues for me in this program is maximizing that grant portion of the PPP. And that is just because we just don't know what the final rules are. And we really don't know the impact of what your employees are going to have. Basically, if you're given a note, if you get a note for the PPP, which I have on my desk here, and many of you have seen, there is a loan forgiveness portion in there. But we don't know how long, because when you receive your funds, if you receive them today, it's 60 days from today. So 60 days from April 22nd, let's say it's June 21st. Your funds are going to be gone then if it's under the regular 60-day rule. This could actually be a benefit for those of you that did not get your PPP, and it comes the first or second week in May to where your funds are going to now last past 4th of July. That could be a real benefit, having the funds that actually come a little bit later, but we won't know until the final rule's out, and we won't know how to maximize that grant portion of that, which is so important for many of the small businesses I've talked to who really don't want to take on additional debt. So there's a survival component of that we could talk about, but this is going to be a lot of stuff for next week. So the forgiveness, the final rules. Oops, a little quick there.
Real quick, Kelly, I want to jump in here.
Okay.
Those that are out there, if you have if you work with an accountant, or if you have some type of access to whether even maybe some of the bookkeepers out there, most of the accounts out there have calculator apps for the PPP. The question is going to be on the forgiveness piece. That's where the final rules are. But there's some there's some apps online. I mean, again, you can go in and, well, how should I calculate everything? You can look online. There's a number of them there, plus your accountant and or financial advisor may have one. But keep in mind that the big thing is the final interim rule, which will determine what is actually going to be forgiven, thus creating the grant piece.
So yes, those are a great rule of thumb and can give you some really guidance, along with the spreadsheet that we provided a few weeks ago. And actually, if you want to email me, I have received a couple of them. So thanks Ken and a few others out there that have sent me some of these rules from various legal entities around the country. But I just want to start comparing those when we get the final rules, and then it's going to really be powerful, and we'll be able to have. And that's going to be next week, unless somehow the SBA misses the congressional deadline for this, which is 4/26. I don't see that happening. Do you, Keith?
No, not at all. It may come out sooner.
So, one of the common complaints, and I don't have permission to give away a Chevron gas card for next week, but I'm going to, just because I'm in a playful mood today. That happens on Webinar Wednesday. So I'm going to come up with this thing, since so many of you have said, what am I going to do with these employees? How are they going to really benefit my business when they can't do their normal job yet? And that is a common theory. So let's play a little game called Great Things Your Business Can Do with Too Many Employees. And I came up with a few ideas, and I'll take emails in this. I'll take some in the chat box for today. I'll take emails during the week. And, you know, if I can pull this off, I will award someone or many, hopefully, with some great ideas on how we can use these employees. And, you know, I just came up with these. You can do a super clean. Cleaning is going to be important when we transition back into a working environment with a virus that's still going to be out there, maybe not as prominent, but it's still going to be out there. Ideas, you can actually work on your employee handbook and reopening strategy. You can do some strategic planning. You have key employees, and your business continuity plan can be done by these key employees, as can some of your most social media and marketing ideas for when you get up and going. Your business might do crowdfunding, and you might look into doing a crowdfunding campaign, because I and Keith have both, I'm speaking for Keith now, we both feel there's a need for capital after these two programs run out. Unless you get that really nice big fat EIDL loan, there's going to be need for capital as we move on and adapt and change as we go. So send me some ideas. We'll see what we can do. Keith, talk about some of our other debt funding programs that are either out there that are coming online, and maybe hopefully some of these other funding sources like crowdfunding and other things that can come down the road sometime soon.
Yeah, you know, what's interesting is over the last week since I last did the webinar, I've gotten more inquiries about the EBL. You know, we're throwing acronyms around, but the Small Business Administration Express loan. That's up to $25,000, and that is a loan that if you're an SBA Express lender, and there's several of them out there, that is an option for some of the customers that whether they were shut out on an EIDL, or they're waiting for a decision on the EIDL, that they can perhaps even get involved with that. Now that's a different type of loan program. You're looking at rates. I think the max rate is 6.5%. There is a application fee. There's other criteria for that particular loan. But you may want to reach out to your lender, and chances are it's going to be a larger lender that does the express bridge loans, and see, in fact, are they participating with that. You may end up with a combination of that loan on an interim basis. You may get the EIDL, you may get the PPP. Hopefully you get one or two of those particular loans. I think I talked about the debt relief. That's something we're excited about. Where again, I can't repeat, folks that have already participated with SBA loans and have SBA loans, the SBA is making their payments for 6 months. It's not a deferment. So if you were one of my customers that we did a medical office or a nail salon or a gas station or a motel or a dental, or you name the type of businesses that we deal with, and you have an existing 504 SBA loan or 7A loan that's in good standing, you are getting your payments made on the SBA portion for 6 months. So you do the math. If you're paying $1,000 a month, that's $6,000. If you're paying $10,000, that's $60,000. I did have a client that got $180,000 worth of payments made for 6 months. So that's positive. Access to capital. The state has got a program. Kelly, I think you're doing a lot with those guys, and I think I'm more excited about the last slide. Locally, fortunately, Kelly and I were in on a conference call last week, and there's some local monies that may be coming fairly soon.
And I think we'll see a lot of that. And, maybe even an additional stimulus. There's talk of a tax credit system or tax credit where you actually would keep your employees' payroll taxes as part of the stimulus and things like that. So there's a lot of ideas, and there's a lot of things that are going to be happening in the next few weeks. A lot of things out there as far as equity as well. For our self-employed people, just kind of an update. Self-employed individuals, including business owners, sole proprietors, independent contractors, if you have been essentially put out of business, you can actually apply for unemployment assistance. And the unemployment portal through the state of California should be up in about another 8 to 10 days. So don't try to do that just yet, as unemployment system is completely clogged up as well. There's some resources that you can go to and you can look. So there's the pandemic unemployment assistance for those individuals. We've talked a lot. I want to get to your questions, so I'm going to blow through a few of these like we always do at the end of these slides. But really, please look to defer as many obligations as you can. And as I said earlier, I will talk about cash flow, and I'll talk about it a lot and as often as people listen to me. So start deferring as much as you can do, and then start conservatively estimating what your revenues are going to be on startup. They're not going to be like they were in 2019 in most cases. So defer, estimate your expenses, and do some cash flow. I like to use that form. You can use whatever. You can adapt and continue to do that. And just a quick brief look ahead. Come up with your strategy, but start following communities that are opening up early. We've got some talk about in the South, some states might open up a little bit earlier, but continue to kind of monitor their process and see some of the issues and some of the problems that are going on in those communities. And travelers, I think our communities in the Eastern Sierra are going to like this, that travelers are going to likely choose rural destinations over urban. And lastly, focus on a short-term business continuity plan. Be a good leader. Some future webinars will be back next week. But right now, we want to get to your questions and answers. We have quite a few. Well, we don't want to get to your answers. We want to get to Keith's answers. But what we can do is we can actually do this now and now move on to our questions. And I'm going to try to avoid the ones that have the funds for the PPP that are part of the forgiveness for the grants. But here's a good first question. If you have been approved for PPP, does it make sense to apply for disaster loan assistance? And can you receive both?
Absolutely. What you can't do is you can't receive both for the same expense item, but I would strongly encourage you to apply for the EIDL loan. Again, depending on the dollar amount, the EIDL has that $10,000 grant component. So again, I'll repeat, it's a $10,000 grant. Now, that may be a small amount to someone or some small businesses, but it can be impactful for other ones. So definitely you can apply to both of them. And the EIDL application is so easy. You go online. Unfortunately, I wish the SBA was live on the process, but from when it was first rolled out to what it is now, it takes you a relatively short period of time to get it completed.
Keith, how would you find out the status of your EIDL application?
So there's really three ways to check on the EIDL loan. One, you can, if you have a number, you can go on the portal. You can email. There's an email disaster. Let me see if I have that handy real quick. And then there's a phone number. And I've had customers do all three. And you can get a live body. Now the challenge may be the timing, but especially if you have a application number. So when you're reaching out, whether it's via email, whether it's being through the portal, or whether it's being on the phone, make sure you have enough information to where they can identify who they're talking to. Preferably a application number and or a name. Let me see if I have that.
And Timothy, the second part of your question was you filed it the very first Sunday when they opened on Monday. So that suggests that is a pre-March 30th filing. And we've recommended that people go back in the portal and update that. And when the portal opens up, I would go back in, anybody who has filed before 3/30, to go back in and to basically refresh your application through the portal, which is much more quicker and much more simpler. And also, just a reminder, the numbers we saw today, 750,000 of these have been funded. and they've received over 4 million. So I think that there's going to be enough money by the numbers that we kind of were going over today. So I think that there's a very good chance for those that got in early and got in now often, that there'll be funding available.
One thing about the EIDL loan program, because that's a direct loan for the SBA had to staff up underwriters. So they went from a normal disasters thinner underwriting team to having to do that at least 10 to 15 times. So they're staffing up. I do have a phone number. It's 1-800-659-2555. That's the SBA disaster number, 1-800-659-2955. Again, make sure you have your number when you call there. The email, it's disastercustomerservice@sba.gov. You can go to sba.gov and they'll have all that stuff, but that's the way you need to reach out to them. You have to be consistent. That's the only thing I can tell you.
And we're going to stay on about another 15 minutes answering questions. You're welcome to hang out with us. The next question is, I'm a business attorney, and without any advertising, I've had numerous calls, primarily inquiring for answers to get SBA relief loans. Can an advisor or third party even get involved?
Yeah, that's the tricky part, in that because all of the fees associated with especially the PPP, the EIDL's a different animal, so to speak, but the PPP, there are no fees that are charged to the customer, to the small business owner. However, the SBA does pay fees to the lender. And the lender, and it's the one thing about the program, I'm trying to pull up the fees right now, but the fees are highly regulated. And if you're let's say you're an attorney, you're an accountant, then you will have had to reach some type of an agreement with the lender, because again, if you're a small business customer out there, you better not be paying any fees. I will emphasize that again. The PPP loan program, there are no fees charged you, but there are real good fees that the lender can earn, and the lender has a formula to look at if they're going to pay a consultant, whether that's an attorney, an accountant, or anybody designated.
Okay, next question is, you said EIDL loans are closed, but will the portal take applications?
Yeah, I looked this morning, and no, I said this morning, I tell people you need to look at the SBA website multiple times a day, because they may go live before you know it, but they are not accepting any applications right now. So again, the timing when, I strongly encourage, when the bill is signed by the president, I would be on the SBA website, shortly after, just to see what's, if they're going to go live with accepting EIDL applications. My sense is, and I have nothing to base this on, that because they have a huge backlog, there may be a delay before they go live on it.
So if I get a PPP to pay for payroll and rent, what information do I need to submit to my lender to assist with working capital?
So are you talking about you're applying for the PPP, under the PPP loan? I mean,
it sounds that way.
Yeah, there are specific, here's one of the challenges that the lending community has out there with the PPP. The lending community is required to verify all supporting documentation that the small business owner is submitting for the PPP, and they are to verify via whether it's quarterly tax statements, whether it's tax returns, because when they are in fact when you make the request for the forgiveness, they're going to have to, I'm sorry, do the analysis based on what was originally submitted, what was provided when you have the forgiveness request, along with the final regs that we will find out about hopefully next week. So they're not asking for a lot of documentation, but if you're applying for a PPP and they're asking for 5 items, you give them 5 items. If you give them 4 items and you want to dispute the 5th, then you will go back to the bottom of the queue. So reach out to your lender. Reach out. You can go out online. You can also. I saw a lot of questions in the chat where they've had some success on what was needed. Reach out to your accountant if you have an accountant. Most accountants are processing. They understand what's needed for the PPP. So because they're providing a lot of the information.
Okay, next question is, what if employees are already drawn on unemployment as PPP is taking too long? And let me start with that one, Keith, because I hear this question a lot, and I know there's a lot of frustration out there regarding what is now being referred to as the bonus federal unemployment of $15 an hour. And it's really a tough situation, because if you have a valued employee and they can make more money sitting at home, and they realize that from both of the programs, it kind of puts the employer in a very awkward situation. And I think it's going to come down to the final rules, and it's going to come down to the relationship you have with your employee and how valuable they are to your organization on an ongoing basis. Would be the best way I could answer that.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, that's always, that's where those kind of scenarios is where I struggle. Is the PPP the best thing for the company and the employee? And it may not be. They may have to pivot to the EIDL for other expense areas, and hope to hire back somewhere down the road. So again, the PPP may not be for everybody.
Okay. Next question is, who are the SBA lenders? I need to apply for EIDL, and the SBA site references to apply through SBA lenders.
EIDL is a direct loan from the SBA. So there are no SBA lenders for EIDL. Now for the $25,000 disaster, which again, these acronyms sort of throw some people off, but that is the EBL loan. That's an express bridge loan. Then that is an SBA lender program. But the EIDL program is a direct loan from the SBA.
And as a follow-up is, how do I apply for a 7A loan for veteran-owned small businesses?
You're going to
the SBA website refers these SBA lenders.
Yeah, again, SBA lender would be any designated lender in the community. You have all the major banks are designated SBA lenders. Here's what I think the challenge is going to be. They are overwhelmed with PPP requests. So getting to a regular 7A loan request, it may be a while. And I don't want to speak for all the lenders, but I know most of them are working on PPP loans right now.
I keep hearing that EIDL applications starting with the number 3 are still being processed. Is that what you have heard?
That I don't know. I know at one time I had a client that was number 27,000, and they got funding. So unlike the PPP, where that loan was made by the bank, and quite frankly, the banks took care of some of their bigger customers prior to taking care of some of the other customers. The EIDL is directly with the SBA, so that is you're stamped in at a certain time and you have your place in line. Now, what may impact that is if you have an incompleted application. So, but again, so far as are they in the 3s, I have not heard that.
And what I have heard is if your application begins with the number 3, they are being processed, or it is a good sign. I've heard that from a few different clients. So I think what you've heard is true, but we'll wait and see. A follow-up question is, I'm a seasonal business with primary operating season of mid-May through mid-September. We don't have customers or staff right now. Should we still apply for PPP?
That's always a tricky thing, because I know with the seasonal formula, which I've seen, is that they take it from January to, I think it's January to March. Well, I don't want to misspeak here. Let me see if I have that handy. But they will take the seasonal period for your basis. And it's a pretty standard formula. Let me see if I can come up with that. Ask another question while I'm looking for that, Kelly.
Okay, next question. And I'll just throw in that there is a formula for seasonal workers, and the formula wasn't very advantageous. I would look at it for winter season mostly, since we do cover in Mono County. So it's going to depend on the payroll, but there is a seasonal formula out there. And if the seasonal formula presented enough money for you to apply for, then yes, I would go ahead with that.
Okay, I actually found it, Kelly, and this is part of the Treasury had the most frequently asked questions, and it is, my small business is a seasonal business whose activity increases from April to June. Considering activity from the period would be more accurate reflection of my business operations. However, my small business was not fully ramped up in February 15th, 2020. Am I still eligible? In the lender, what they have to look at is the business operation from February 20th on an 8-week basis, and from February 15th, 2019 to June 30th, 2019. So there is a way to do it. You have to get with your lender and make sure they have the formula, but you're not totally shut out.
Self-employed, I don't have payroll, but I provide 1099 for my drivers. Can I apply for PPP?
Boy, I am not going to tackle that one, Kelly, because the self-employed, I think it was April 10th, was that when they were able to apply for the PPP?
I'm going to take that one then. And you can't apply on behalf of the contractors that receive the 1099s. The drivers that get the 1099s can apply for themselves. But being a self-employed individual, what you can do is you can apply, and it essentially comes down to the 2 months of earnings for the year for your business. So let's say on your tax return, you file a Schedule C being self-employed, and you have $60,000. If you take 2 months of that, divide it by 12, it's 5,000 times 2, it would be 10,000. You could apply for 10,000 for the 8-week period. Let's see, next question. Is there a way to automatically register for further webinars? I think I'm finding that a lot of our webinar attendees aren't getting added to our blast. I apologize for that. We'll make every effort to correct that this next week. As a brief follow-up, can consultants only be paid by a lender, or could a nominal fee be charged if they need help and cannot contact their banker?
You know, I can't emphasize enough. The SBA they're really strict on outside agents, and even prior to this stimulus package, you literally had to be vetted to be an outside agent to provide loan packages to banks. or to lenders. So trying to get a fee to do the application is, it has to, the rule right now says it has to be paid by the lender. So until something changes, it's paid by the lender right now. And the lenders are being compensated via the SBA, and they have a specific formula that they can pay out to a referral source or preparer.
Okay, our last question, and who are our local lenders in Bakersfield? This is my first time. I'm self-employed. How do I apply for unemployment? Okay, we can talk about that. Send me an email at kbearden@csup.edu. But Keith, who are our local lenders for somebody who's looking for probably a smaller size PPP in Bakersfield? Who's out there now?
And that's always the big question. Up until a week ago, there was a list floating out there of lenders that will take non-com. First off, almost all lenders are looking at their existing customers first. Okay, so if you're an existing, you have to have a deposit. If you're a small business owner, you have a deposit relationship with someone out there. I know the independent banks here in town are still considering stuff on a case-by-case basis, but they're not aggressively looking at new non-customer loans. So if you don't have a relationship, I'm actually going to encourage you to look at one of the online lenders. There is not the fee structure. There's no fees, as I keep emphasizing. So it's just how quickly can they process your loan. Valley Strong, if you are a member, not sure if Valley is taking new applications. They were in the past. They may still be doing it. I would call or go online to find out who's out there doing new loans. I know, the last update I talked to the lenders, they're trying to get through their all the prior applications that they need to get done. So a lot of them aren't really looking at new applications right now.
And the other thing is, recall from earlier when we talked about the new legislation, if it's passed by the House and signed by the President, contains a huge portion for smaller lenders. And, $60 billion for community banks and credit unions and online lenders, and others for outreach to women, minority and rural owned businesses. So keep that in mind, because that might be the pool of funds that is around longer and maybe even more beneficial, even if you have to wait a couple of weeks.
Yeah, the other thing I would encourage you is reach out to other sources. I mean, the SBDC, we get calls here. This information is changing hourly, and after we get done with this webinar, we may get whether Kelly or myself, we may get a call or an email. Hey, XYZ lender is looking at new applications. So you got to be consistent in looking at more and more sources out there.
Well said. And we will continue to do that. And we'll make a special note that once the portals and the applications are being accepted again, is to revisit the lenders next week also, in addition to the final rules. So it's going to be an action-packed webinar next week too, Keith. So, but let's wrap this up. I'd like to thank Keith Brice for being our special guest this week and for answering so many pertinent SBA questions and other things along that line. For next week, we will be back. Again, congratulations for those of you that are going to win the $100 Chevron gift cards. You will be notified by KEDF real soon. And that's a wrap for this week. So for Keith Brice, Kelly Bearden, have a great week and good luck in your PPP and IDLs. Goodbye, everybody.